The message from House Republicans to President Biden is clear. There will be no increase in the debt limit in the absence of significant and meaningful spending cuts.
Republican lawmakers are still planning to hold the debt ceiling hostage unless Democrats agree to cutting popular social safety net programs, which would be a bad idea. Luckily, the White House seems to reject this notion. We'll see how it actually plays out. But just to back up for a second, we all know this, right? Lawmakers absolutely need to raise the debt ceiling, and they need to do so as early as June or risk federal default. Federal default could basically just be a giant economic disaster. It would be an economic disaster of epic proportions, and it could even tank the global economy. Now, their latest pitch is to require work requirements for the poorest Americans who rely on things like Medicaid and food stamps. So the House Budget Committee, according to the Washington Post, last week specifically called attention to what it described as a culture of government dependency, citing an uptick in spending in Medicaid and other federal programs, including food stamps, unemployment insurance, disability benefits, and tax credits for low-income parents with children. Gee, I wonder what that could be about. I mean, did Americans really get a lot of assistance during the coronavirus pandemic? Isn't it weird that there's an increase in the number of Americans who might need a little bit of help, might need to tap into our social safety net to make ends meet? I mean, have wages kept up with inflation? You hear Republicans talk about inflation all day, every day. Oh, it's all Biden's fault, inflation, inflation, inflation. So it's so weird to me that on one hand, they talk about how the cost of living has gone up rapidly. Wages have certainly not kept up with inflation. And then they turn around and say, government dependency, we gotta cut spending, everybody. Matt Gaetz is one of those Republicans. He was quoted as saying, I don't think hardworking Americans should be paying for all the social services for people who could make a broader contribution and instead are couch potatoes. You see, that is what the so-called populist Republicans really think about ordinary Americans. They're just couch potatoes. They're not struggling as a result of the high cost of living. They're not struggling with low wages. They're just couch potatoes. But Matt Gaetz isn't the only Republican who said that. There's Kevin McCarthy too. He published a letter in regard to the need to cut spending on these programs. But what would that look like? Well, in February, Matt Gaetz released legislation that would deny benefits to able-bodied adults unless they work for 120 hours per month, volunteer or participate in a work program for 80 hours, or participate in a combination of those activities. What's really interesting is these Republicans tend to avoid looking at any data that proves that most Americans who need to tap into social safety net programs are in fact working. It's just that their employers don't pay them enough. And so the federal government has to subsidize their employer by providing these benefits. So if I were Matt Gaetz, first place I would look is how much Walmart pays its employees, how much these major corporations pay their employees. And if you have employees that are working full-time jobs, but still are not making enough to make ends meet, maybe you do something to, I don't know, raise the federal minimum wage, for example. Let's get to McCarthy's letter, by the way. He also chimed in. And he said, he called on the president to negotiate and spelled out his party's latest demands. That included steep spending cuts and new policies, strengthening work requirements for those without dependents, a reference to children, citing that the fact that Biden supported the welfare to work approach adopted under Clinton in the 1990s. So that is true. Biden supported a lot of really terrible policies. And so when Republicans cite Biden's past, it's pretty cringy for Biden, but it is true. I want to be honest about that. Now, during the coronavirus crisis, lawmakers enacted temporary rules that essentially prevented states from pushing people out of the Medicaid rolls. But those prohibitions unfortunately expired on April 1st. And that opens the door for the state health officials to begin reevaluating eligibility. And here's what is likely to happen as a result of that. Approximately 15 million low-income Americans are ultimately expected to lose their coverage as a result, including 6.8 million who still qualify for the program, according to federal estimates in August. Look, luckily, so far, President Joe Biden, rhetorically at least, has made it seem as though he will reject any negotiation having to do with cutting social spending, cutting these programs. He is not in favor of it. I'll give you a few examples. A spokesperson for the White House said this: the president has been clear that he will oppose policies that push Americans into poverty or cause them to lose health care. That's why he opposes Republican proposals that would take food assistance and Medicaid away from millions of people by adding burdensome bureaucratic requirements. That last part's really important because it's not just about working, or it's not just about the work requirements. It's also about the added bureaucracy that creates more obstacles in getting Americans the help they need. And I'm sorry, especially when it comes to things like food stamps. Okay, so let's say that the dream case that Republicans have in their minds of some lazy parent who refuses to work is true. But that parent has children. You're really gonna take food stamps away from that family over your discomfort with a parent who refuses to work? Why should the children suffer the consequences of that? And when we consider how much money we waste every single year on corporate subsidies, the Defense Department, I mean, there's waste all around. But there's never any discussion about cutting defense spending, ever. Year after year, they consistently increase defense spending. But when it comes to feeding our own children, when it comes to taking care of our fellow Americans, the so-called populist Republicans want to do away with it. I mean, it's just so incredibly gross. And this is what they do. This is what they want. And there is no reason that the Biden administration should engage in these types of negotiations, because there's no way that the Republican Party is gonna want egg on its face by refusing to raise the debt ceiling. Refusing to raise the debt ceiling would mean that there would be a global economic collapse. That wouldn't just be bad for all of us, it would be bad for them too. So, I mean, I guess it might be a game of chicken, but I think the Biden administration should call their bluff. I think the Democratic Party should call their bluff and refuse to cut any spending pertaining to the social safety net, whatever we have left of the social safety net. Really, the Republican Party has little to stand on here. And if I were a member of the Democratic Party, if I were a member of the Biden administration, I'd be talking about what Republicans want to do day in and day out. This is who they are. This is what they represent. Even Donald Trump, as buffoonish as he is, was smart enough to understand that attacking Ron DeSantis over his calls to cut Social Security and Medicare would bode well for campaigning purposes. But where are the Democrats on this issue? They need to be raising hell over what Republicans are threatening to do, and I just haven't seen enough of it.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.